ladies and gentlemen, to Superhuman Entrepreneur. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Accurso, and I am really pumped for the guy that we have on today. He is a mentor of mine, honestly. At this point, I've watched so much of his stuff and learned from him so far. He's going to blow your mind today. His name is Brian Mackenzie, and just to let you know, he is one of the top mentors for the world's most elite athletes. So we're going to talk a little bit about what he does with those athletes and why he does what he does. But essentially, he's a world-renowned strength and conditioning coach. He's studied altitude and hypoxic training for over 10 years. He's run over 30 ultra marathons, including the Angeles Crest 100 endurance run. He's authored 2 books, Power, Speed, Endurance, and Unplugged, Evolve from Technology to Upgrade Your Fitness, Performance, and Consciousness. And Brian, you've been featured in a ton of stuff. If I went through the list, we'd have to sit here for like an hour.
Don't.
But I just want to let everybody know, though, that some of your stuff has been featured in Competitive Magazine, Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Body, Men's Journal, ESPN Rise. Big stuff that you're doing in the world. And people are seeking you. You're running seminars in Hawaii. So you're all over the world teaching. I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Matt. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And the bio is a little bit, it's a little bit much sometimes. I think we're whittling that thing down to like, just be point driven, but
bullet points.
Yeah. I know it's just it's a weird thing that ends up happening and people want it and you have to put something together and people put something together, whatever. It's all good. I've had some fun over the last, probably 20 years. And I think it's largely just due to curiosity, which is a word that kind of, I think is pretty important in any profession. So,
For sure. And I think you're kind of hitting on some really cool things about yourself without saying cool things about yourself. But, one of the things that I've noticed about you is just how when you explain things, you simplify them so much. Like you allow people to kind of get on their level and you're able to explain things in a way that are very simple. And I love that about you because I think that's the hardest part about educating people is we tend to use way too many words and we tend to describe way too much about something. And so you really break things down. And I think that a lot of our high performers out there are going to get a lot from this conversation because you're just so good at teaching because you've obviously been doing it for many, many, many years. Let's start from the very beginning. You're in this realm now where it's normal for you to be training Rich Froning and Aaron Cafaro and Jamie Mitchell, the big wave surfer. And this is just like everyday life for you. And then you're going to be in Hawaii soon teaching some breathing training. How'd you get into this?
I was like on the 9-year plan, I guess. I mean, I was like I say this, it's not necessarily the total truth. It's a nice little story. It was probably like the 6-year plan in community college, right?
I was on it.
And I say the 9-year because it sounds better, but not all stories are true. Most of them are false. So the fact is it's like I went to college. I barely graduated high school only because I wanted to play sports. And so I did the bare minimum and showed up to enough school to actually get by. I took 4 years of auto shop, rebuilt 4 engines from top to bottom. I was a greaser. I hung out with rockabillys, punk rock. I grew up in the 80s when punk rock was and skateboarding was this thing, and it saved my life, but it also put me in and if you've ever seen video or pictures of me, you'll see that I'm pretty covered in tattoos. And it's not because I think they're cool. It's because the people I looked up to and what I was around, that was what I grew up on. I grew up on like Social Distortion and Orange County or Laguna Beach that was not on TV. There was violence, there was skinheads, there was, these things that in most places do not exist anymore. But for some, in some places they do. Right. And the norm for me was kind of was almost challenge authority. and
Yep.
do not stick to the norm.
Yep.
And and as bad as that had, you know, my childhood was about, getting attention because I felt like I wasn't being heard. It's something I picked up from my father to a large degree, although my parents were great people and they did amazing job with raising us.
Yeah.
We all have this way of being brought up, things that we fall into. And my way of getting attention was rebellion, and thus barely going to school. And then finally, you know, making it, I dropped out at my senior year and went to a community college to finish, to get my to graduate from high school. Right.
Yeah.
So, and I did that before everybody graduated, which was funny, but I went to less school. I did the bare minimum, and then I went on and I was in community college, and I ended up taking an exercise science class in there, and something stoked a fire, and I went full bore, was like straight A's. I was into it. And then I asked some questions and they couldn't be answered. And that in essence deterred me to people who could answer some of those questions, or were doing things. And, that's where getting involved in mentoring and kind of a process that's really lost, I think, in most industries that we've seen, I imagine you're probably close to my age. I'm 43. And,
don't put me that far up there, Brian. Come on.
No.
I'm kidding. I'm just joking. And you don't look at it all, by the way. You're the type of person you can't guess I'm serious. Like, you can't guess your age.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
But it's interesting because I watched when cooking and chefs didn't matter. Like, nobody gave a shit about any of that. Yeah. And then a couple things happened, and my wife and I had this conversation actually last night when she picked me up from the airport. And it was like a guy by the name of Anthony Bourdain, who was a chef, but he was a de facto kind of guy who didn't really give a shit, but he was a decent journalist and ended up promoting some people and making something happen. But what's interesting about this is that the process of becoming a chef, you're never going to see a phenom, somebody in their early 20s who's going to rise up, become a head chef, and run a restaurant. Yeah. Because they're going to go learn how to wash dishes. They're going to learn how to work the line. They're going to learn how to set menus. They're going to learn all these things. And I kind of had to go through that process pretty hardcore. Yeah. Through this whole exercise world, or, human performance. And that's what kind of landed me where I was. But I remained curious enough to not, one way was not the answer. I spent enough time in enough places to kind of hey, long, slow distance endurance training was fun. And I had, it worked for me for some time, but then it didn't. Yeah. And I got rid of what didn't. Yeah. It wasn't that I got rid of all the long, slow distance. I started challenging things and testing things. And this inevitably brought in heat training for extreme temperatures, cold training, this brought in hypoxic work and understanding altitude and how you could manipulate things, and, not really talking about all that early on, but then all of a sudden breath work came into play. And it was a funny thing, because, I laughed at something called the training mask, and I had never used this thing. And I instantly knew that
I call them predators. I call them predators.
Yes. And they look like that. And this is why I laughed at him. Why don't you put something so ridiculous on your face and work out? Yeah. I challenged the idea, before even doing anything or experiencing anything. And I knew instantly I was just being ignorant. And so I put the thing on and instantly noticed a change in not only my breathing mechanics, but my position and motor control, and things that were very important that were not being talked about with this thing. And so that started an exploration on, really deep diving into breath work and really understanding that. And that ended up going down rabbit holes that were, new rabbit holes and new doors and new turns. And, I landed in, a lot of different camps and learned a lot of different things from, yogis, from Wim Hof, from Patrick McEwen, from, a buddy of mine, Leo, in Ireland, and who's all of these people are trickled all over the place. Kelly Starrett, I grew up with, Andy Galpin, challenged even what I was saying, and found that what I was talking about actually had some validity to it. And, it just, I just kind of remained curious, and that's how it
Yeah.
all kind of happened and why it happened. And it was never about, hey, where am I going to go? It was, I used the analogy of like, I used to love building tree forts as a kid. Like we'd just go, we'd find the biggest tree, we'd climb up that sucker, and we'd like build something, and it'd
Yeah.
be our like hideout. We'd either stash
I
movie
love that when I was
magazines
a
or
kid.
whatever,
Yeah.
you know, whatever we were, you know, but I equate that to like what I do.
Yeah.
If it doesn't feel like I'm building a tree fort, I'm not doing it.
Man, that's good. That's good. I love that analogy because, you know, because it's your passion. It ignites you. You wake up and you know, okay, this is a calling. It's not just something I'm trying to do to get more money or get the next best thing. And I think that's so important. And you hit on a lot of things just now. One of the things I want to talk about for a minute, you know, you mentioned how, you know, you were into the endurance racing and you were pushing yourself. And I relate a lot with that and I relate a lot with your story, by the way, because when I was in high school, I didn't give a lick about high school. I wasn't good at it. Wasn't engaged with the schoolwork. I was there for social, and then I got into surfing, and that just took off for me. And I just split off because I was like, you know, this is something I'm passionate about, and I'm not getting anything from this other situation over here.
Mm-hmm.
And as I grew up, I started to see that I was filling a need, kind of secretly filling a need. I was pushing myself really, really hard, and I was kind of escaping some emotional things that I wasn't addressing. Would you say that, and it sounds like you were in that place as well, maybe with the endurance stuff, were you finding that you were doing all these endurance things because you were essentially trying to escape something?
Yeah, I think there was definitely, you know, I'm a good friend of mine and business partner now. His name's Dr. Andrew Huberman. Came up with a very good definition of addiction. And addiction is nothing more than the narrowing of things that bring us pleasure. And
love that.
I did not get into endurance because I wanted to. I got into endurance because I felt pressured a little bit because I was doing some things that I had a background in swimming. Like I swam for 20 years, fairly competitively.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't world class, but you know, I probably could have pushed to some degree and done really well. But I got over swimming lanes, you know, at about 20. And I was doing a spin class with a girlfriend at the time, and there was this crazy guy in there who was hooting and hollering and all this stuff. And
there always is, right?
yeah. And there was something very attractive about this guy, and it was the first time I saw a professional sufferer. And this is what an endurance athlete is. It's manufactured suffering. And because we don't live in the world that we used to, and there's nothing wrong with this.
Yeah.
Because we don't live in the world we used to, we have to manufacture suffering in order to feel good about ourselves. Because if we don't do that, then we end up getting too slothful and all this shit, right?
Yeah.
And so Kip was living the dream, and he ended up becoming a mentor of mine. But he's like, the guy had already done like 10 Ironmans, and I had no idea at the time.
Wow.
He's like, look, you'd be phenomenal at doing triathlon, man. You'd be so good. And this went on for like a couple months, and finally I was like, screw it, I'll sign up for a sprint triathlon. And I did a sprint triathlon, and I trained my brains out for it. And I maybe swam twice a week because I knew I was very technically good at swimming, right?
Yeah.
Came out of the water like in top 10, right? And then I got on the bike, which I had grinded miles on the bike for training. And I literally probably lost 50 to 100 places. Then I got on the run, which was a 5K. Yeah. And I literally was passed by several overweight people who encouraged me to keep going. And awesome. That was my first experience with true humility and honoring it and saying to myself, I need to get better at this. I can be better at this. And so that's what spearheaded something that ended up narrowing to where I became this. If I didn't do the endurance training, my life, things weren't good. Like I needed that thing, right? Yeah. And I recognized that, you know, and I was able to, you know, and I think that goes back to the original question of like, hey, why did you get into these things? Like, what is that? You know, what did that do? What's the escape? You know, all of that. I mean, when I was doing ultras, people were like, what are you running from? And I'm like, why do you keep asking that? Why do you keep asking?
I've been asked that question too. Not
it
with
finally
marathons though.
yeah, but I mean, it finally made sense in the first 100-miler that I did, that I accomplished. And I was like, oh, I get it. Like, I'm just, I'm trying to, not deal with what's really going on by going and running and then nothing mattering after that, which is, that's a lot like kind of addiction. Like,
It's so true.
Yeah. So that was when the retooling began, and it was like, why are you doing it? And let's give more purpose to this, and let's develop this a little bit better. And it was never intended to be a program.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was just intended to be this way of like being curious. And I just happened to own a gym at the time. Yeah. And I had trainers working with me, and they were all invested in this. And we just started tweaking, and clients followed things, and it grew and grew and grew. And then I was given a platform to kind of teach that on.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And so now your latest book is called Unplugged. Yep. And it's essentially about, you put it as evolving from technology to upgrade your fitness, performance, and consciousness. What does that mean? Evolving from technology?
Yeah. So I don't think we're necessarily, one, technology's evolving and accelerating at a rate that we as a species cannot keep up with. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
And so if you don't embrace technology, you're not going to keep up with the acceleration of the species.
Right.
That being said.
Right. Because I think some people think that I'm going to just completely abandon technology.
Yes.
Right. But then all of a sudden you're in a black hole, right? Yeah.
Yeah. This is the paradox. And this is what we see happening with our parents, where they start to give up because they're getting a little bit older, and they're just like, it's just too much. I don't need it. So I'm just going to watch TV and get my news from there, which that's not news anymore. That hasn't been news for about 10 years.
Absolutely.
It's a completely evolved thing that's now an opinion piece that runs and runs and runs and runs. And you don't get the morning paper anymore, and that's not the new. It's like true. This is why we need to stay up with technology to understand, hey, we're moving in a place that where I honestly, I think there's one person who's really nailing this right now on how we need to evolve. And I think we did a fairly good job, Andy and I, of, because Andy is my co-author on, one of my co-authors on Unplugged, Dr. Andy Galpin, but we did a fairly good job of getting this message out. But the fact is it's a guy by the name of Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote Sapiens and Homo Deus. He talks about history, and he talks about the progression of the species and where we're headed. And he's a historian. And he's the only one talking about really the only thing that we need to be concerned with. And that is our behavior and how we have progressed as a species. And we continue to repeat the behavior that we have been invested in. Our political system is, and I'm not even political, but our political system is an exact representation of what has happened over time, even with religion, and why religion gets such a bad rap.
Yeah.
And religion isn't a bad thing. I mean, I was in a great conversation yesterday with a nutrition company, and they're like, hey, we want to get people to really start embracing, being more mindful of their food. What do you think about that? And I'm like, look at religion. What do they do before they eat? To give thanks. Yeah. Like there are things to take away from this. And a lot of this, stuff is spelled out so simply everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you have a stressed being eating, if you have two people, and they've tested this on rabbits, and they've tested this, right? There is actual research that shows you got the same meal, clean, healthy, right? And you've got a stressed animal, stressed out eating that, and you've got a very caring, loved animal eating that, you have completely different responses. And we're so concerned with what we're inputting in versus what's actually happening and the behavior of how we're moving forward. We don't sit as families anymore. We don't sit and do things. And this is where I think technology is great, but it's like, look, man, if it narrows your field of what you can do, meaning we've got 16-year-olds who no longer want their licenses and they don't want to have sex.
Yeah.
Those are two terrible fucking things. Sorry, excuse my language, but those are very, very terrible things. Yes. It's a very, very scary thing, because those are very important things as a biological species, those things are almost fundamental. Like maybe driving not as much, but sex actually is. And I'm not saying everybody needs to go out and start
Right.
having
You're talking about the human
like
need.
Yeah, man, it's a basic fundamental, on the most basic fundamental cellular level is reproduction.
Yeah.
We have, and we're like, I'd rather be on my phone. No, like you're going to have to separate at times. And I have this problem just as much as anybody.
Yeah.
Right. I am not immune to any of it, but I think I'm becoming more aware, and I'm trying to use a language that we can all start to understand, that I can communicate in and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing, and what the people around me are experiencing. And there's a way to use it to understand what's going on internally and how to map that out.
Yeah.
We are the ones who are creating AI. It is not reversed.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid of AI. Be afraid of the behavior of us.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. It is. Cause it's like when people say, money is the root of all evil. Well, no, money is a wonderful thing. You can wield it however you want it. It's the same with technology, right? Yeah. There is a balance that has to come from our lives. And yes, we are kind of thrown in to a world where, technology is getting more of a foothold in our lives, and it's doing more in our lives as well. But like you're saying, the behavior control, being mindful of our behavior. Let's talk about that. Cause I think that that's a huge deal now. I mean, obviously you train athletes and you're focusing on behavior. Obviously breath, indicates, behavior, and you're teaching these things, and these things can be looked over very easily, probably like you've seen, especially breathing. People say, well, I breathe every day. Like what do I need to know about breathing? Why is breathing so important? So go into that. Why is breathing so important? How does it control behavior, and why is it important that we focus on these small things that a lot of times we take as little minutiaes?
Yeah. It's fun. You say breathing is something I do every day. That was something Michael Bisping said to me 3 months ago or so, when I was introduced by Pat Tenori, who owns Ruka, which is an apparel company that Michael goes and trains out of, and he's like, hey, this is Brian. He does a lot of breathwork stuff. He does some, he goes, what? I breathe every day, man. What do I need to do that for? And he just kind of walked on. I was like, you're right.
It's such an old school, good old boy comment, by the way, because like a lot of older people think that, right?
But it also tells me a very good story.
Yeah.
And when I am not open to learning.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a reason this guy's introduced me. Look, I don't need to work with Michael. Maybe he'll come around. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I think he's a fine guy. I think he's funny. I think he's a great, fighter. I enjoy watching him. But the interesting thing is I felt the same way. I did the same thing. I said the same thing. I can relate to what he said. I can relate to it all. But I think that, when I've worked with a lot of athletes, I'm by no means a great, phenomenal coach. I'm more of somebody who likes to come in and drop a seed and allow that to kind of get watered and grow itself just by dropping a seed and not really explaining too much. Two of those points would be an Annie Thor's daughter, who really did not enjoy the process of endurance training and how we were going about it and revamping her. And fortunate enough, she has a full-time coach who's a very good friend of mine, who I kind of consult with. His name's Yami Takanen, and he's arguably one of the greatest coaches I know. Okay. That said, this last year, we made her do a lot of nasal breathing and ramping her endurance training up to understand it. And she had some breath work that she was doing as well. She didn't totally understand it and didn't like it because she wasn't like pushing it as hard as she could and seeing big number increases. Yet she finished the games in third place, which is basically better than winning in 2012
Wow.
to a large degree. And she was, and look, that does not mean just because of her endurance training she did this. This is a large part of what her coach did, and really was allowing her to learn from. But she did contact me after the games and was like, look, I just wanted to tell you that I didn't understand, and I was challenging what you were saying, but I was following it because we've worked together. I've worked with her for probably 6 years, and she said, but that had a direct impact on why I performed the way I did at the games and how I lasted the way I did. The other story is Helen Morales, who is an Olympic gold medalist in wrestling, first winner for women in Olympic wrestling, to win a gold medal. I've been working with her through Andy Galpin, and she came to me for some breath work. She deals with a lot of anxiousness prior to competition, things like that. So we set her up on some fingerprinting for breath work, and she took that and was able to learn within a few months how to be engaged with competition, meaning she's actually wrestling somebody and paying attention to their breathing and knowing when they were making mistakes.
Wow.
Or they were cooked. Case in point, Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather. What happened?
Yep.
The moment that boy's mouth opened,
yep,
and he was gassed, Floyd said, okay, it's time.
Yep.
And he just put on a clinic.
Yep.
And that's, I didn't have to say anything. And I think that's the power of coaching, is not having to actually say or do or tell an athlete to do something.
Yeah.
But it's, hey, what can you learn or pick up from this?
Yeah.
And those are important pieces, I think. And that's just high level, man. And
it is.
This trickles down to the general population.
Yeah.
And if it's happening at the highest levels, there's something to take down to general populate to the rest of us.
For sure. Let me ask you, do you think that Conor McGregor would have done better if he would have had known a little bit more about breath work?
I think maybe to some degree breath work, but I think maybe more conditioning wise and understanding breath work as it works with that. I do not think he was going to, my opinion is that you're not going to take a kid who has not boxed his entire life and put him up against a guy who's boxed his entire life and is a tactician. And obviously by watching, you see, he knew exactly when to do what he wanted to do. And he made that fight last. It looked as though he made that fight last.
It did.
To the point to where he wanted it to last. And then he said, okay, it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure. And this is so good because like we're talking about high level stuff, but like you said, it can be taken down to the very basic things. You made a point that was really cool. In one of your interviews, you said there, an antelope and a lion are in a fight and they're both in this high sympathetic state. The only difference is the lion wants to be in the situation. And after the situation happens, if the antelope gets out alive, then they both go back to laying under a tree and eating grass, whatever they do. Parasympathetic state is back, and they're not in that sympathetic state anymore. Whereas us as human beings, we get all stressed out, whether it be a relationship, business. We go to a job we may not like. We get stressed out by someone in the environment that we're in. Then we go pull this really hard workout and we do it over and over and over again. And we never actually allow our bodies to go back into this calm, relaxed state for recovery and balance. And I love that you made that point, because oftentimes in those situations, we're not thinking about our breath. Like that's the last thing we're thinking about. So we have these really short, shallow breaths. And one of the most powerful parts about breathing is that it fights cancer. It fights heart disease. It can combat disease. And a lot of times we don't correlate the two. We're like, well, it's just something, because we're so used to it. It's just breathing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I love that you made that point, because in our everyday, like, we can slow down, we can take a moment, and we can focus on the one most important thing that's going to help us perform. It's going to help us be better in our relationships. It's going to help us in the gym, whatever it might be. You, from a personal standpoint, how do you step out of those times of stress and get your body back into that state that you need to be in.
I breathe.
Show's over, folks. Thanks for coming on with us.
Look, here's the, it's interesting. Well, so one, that story of the lion and the antelope. I was at a talk up in it was Park City, and a guy by the name I think he's a doctor, psychologist by the name of Dr. Marcus Rogan, and he deals with autistic kids, and he was the one that talked about the lion and the antelope.
Okay.
And it just instantly hit me, and I'm like, oh my God, this is such a good story. It just makes so much sense. And it's, even from the get-go, when a lion wants to go after an antelope, they're boom, instant sympathetic, just boom. They go from peripheral into and then the antelope realizes what's going on, boom, and it's on, and it's in sympathetic tone, right? And no matter what happens, even if the antelope does get caught and he gets killed, the lion goes back to this state, right? And he feeds. But if they don't, they do go back to normal. And that's, we get caught, and I get caught in situations all the time where I'm maxed, and I'm like, oh, I overdid it again. The top thing that you can, so Tony, a buddy of mine, Tony Blauer, has kind of coined this thing where it's psychology chases physiology and physiology chases psychology. If you can interrupt the physiology, you have a fighting chance of interrupting the psychology. The difference between us and a lion and an antelope is a lion and an antelope is not conscious of their breathing. It's an involuntary, unconscious thing. It happens. And we can interrupt a pattern, and we have dedicated areas in the brain that are set up for respiration. And when we are CO2 intolerant, and this is the work of Dr. Patrick McEwen has done phenomenal stuff on this with the oxygen advantage. Yeah. And the whole thing is that if our lungs are intolerant, and this comes back from Buteyko's stuff, who is a Russian practitioner, a doctor who really learned about this very, very early on, that if the lungs are intolerant, the autopilot is just going to react to that. Thus, I'm either going to be holding my breath more, or I'm going to be hyperventilating more as a result of being in a flight or freeze state. Fight is actually a trained thing. Yeah. So we've misused sympathetic tone to a large degree, because sympathetic does not mean fight. Sympathetic is trained, it's conscious, it's I'm going to engage in this, and I'm not running, right? Yeah. Versus we've been looking at this, and Dr. Andrew Huberman's really investigating a lot of this, and it really irritates him about the fight thing. But we get in this place, and all of a sudden we're not aware of our breathing. And that's the physiological chase of what's going on, even though there's other physiological processes that are going on. But as that happens, the importance of having something like just 10 breath cycles a morning, like a practice, right? And it doesn't take much, because once you become aware, now you have broadened the things that start to bring us pleasure. So we're not narrowing these things. You're becoming more aware of a tool that can inevitably be an interrupter in a process. And so when I get into these processes, I know to just slow my breathing down, control it to the place to where I can actually downshift and just go, okay, doing too much, alter the breathing, and allow the body to kind of calm down and really deal with what's at the root of what's going on.
Okay.
Versus
so
reactive.
Yeah, man, I love that. And so do you start off like this in the morning? I mean, you probably have a whole routine that you go through.
Usually, yeah.
I'd love for you. Will you talk about, because you said you get up at 4:30 in the morning. What does your routine look like in the morning?
I usually get up and I clean the kitchen, because I like to do some sort of task prioritization. This is something I've learned over the years. Like a good friend of mine, Laird Hamilton, does, he's all about task prioritization. That's his day.
Laird's my childhood hero, man. I've looked up to Laird for a long time.
Laird is detailed, man. And it's exhausting sometimes to be around for a lot of people. But like I once tried to interrupt his process in the morning because I get up before usually most people, and I was doing the dishes at his house because it was just, they were out, and we're close enough that it was like, whatever, I'm going to do it. And he came out and he's like, hey, don't do that. And he was very serious. and he was like, don't do that. And I was like,
dishes.
Why? And he's like, that's part of my process. If I don't do that, I don't feel like I've started my process. So that's how I start the day usually. So I usually go into the kitchen and I try and tell my wife not to do the dishes the night before. Sometimes she does, but when she doesn't and there's stuff out, I clean it up, get it dialed, detailed. Okay, I've done that. Then we set up, I just do some hydration stuff with like salt, water, lemon juice, etc.
Yeah.
Just to
like
get hydrated.
8 ounce, 16 ounces.
About 20 to 30 ounces.
Okay.
And then I'll usually grab some coffee and go into the other room, and I just start to sip my coffee and think about what I'm feeling, and that dictates how I'm going to navigate my breath work. What I'm going to do, and what I feel like I'm missing, what I know I feel like I need to do in order to shift state or shift what's going on in the body, right?
Wow.
And then I'll usually, at this point now, I'm usually working out, at least doing 10 minutes of training right then after I've done the breath work. Then I go hop in the ice tub, and then usually into the sauna after that. And then the day begins.
Nice. And then how does your fitness schedule look? I mean, are you hitting it 5 times a week? What are you doing?
Every day if I'm at home.
Okay.
Usually. And then
every day with weights, or are you like doing paddleboard?
No.
Okay.
No. Every day with activity.
Okay.
I'm in the gym lifting or doing something heavy, a couple times a week. Strength and conditioning is probably a part of my routine, probably 2 or 3 days a week. Then there's usually like after this, I'm going snowboarding.
Nice, man. Like after this call?
Right after this call, I'm going up to the mountain. And I'm just
what I'm talking about.
I'm going to burn like my legs out, and then I'll get back on phone calls, come down the mountain, and come back home, and I'll be home by noon, and we'll get stuff done here, and all that. Where
are you located
right now for the next week?
Yeah.
We're in Central Oregon.
Okay.
We're outside. We're about 30 minutes outside of Bend, Oregon.
Okay.
On about 7 acres in the middle of nowhere, and it's been a hell of a ride. But this kind of goes back to earlier stuff that we were talking about. It's like, we ironed out a process for ourselves about, is money important? Is popularity important? What's important to us? We changed our income. We moved out to the middle of nowhere. We decided we wanted to figure out what was important, and we did that. And we've gotten a lot of opportunities that have just exploded. And so we're moving to the Bay Area, and we're kicking a lot of stuff off and moving. I mean, I've probably done about 100,000 miles in the last 9 months of travel. So
wow.
Wow. And flying out of a little airport is not fun.
I hear you.
It's like 3 or 4 plane flights to get to the East Coast, like to anywhere decent on the East Coast. So it's like, I'm like, oh, like
I hear you, man.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so you're in Hawaii soon, right?
I'm in Hawaii in a week and a half.
And you're teaching your seminar over there.
I will be teaching. So I'm over there for my work with Ruka, who is one of my sponsors. And it's one of the best relationships I've ever had with a company. It's largely because they look at the artistry and what people do and people unique in their world, and they go after that. And they pursued me. And so they've built me out space at their facility with ice and heat and the ability to go in and work with athletes whenever I want when I'm down in Southern California. So I'm headed out to Hawaii for a Ruka Aloha, first start of the kind of big surf season on the North Shore.
Yeah, man.
To work with a lot of the athletes. And then I'll run a seminar at the tail end of that, just for an intimate little setting, like 10 people tops, to do an exposure clinic with breath work, heat, and ice.
Wow. We'll have to connect, man, when I'm in, because I just did a seminar at Travasa Hana over in Maui, and it was amazing, man. It was really cool. But if you're in the area, it would be cool. I'd love to attend some of that stuff.
Yeah. We will be on the East Coast this year.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll just stay connected. That'd be great.
Yes, for sure.
Talk about the method. I mean, I know you probably have a lot of methods that you combine together, but I mean, there's Wim Hof, there's abdominal breathing. You combine all these? Like, what method do you use? Like, what do you find is the most effective for calming someone down and decreasing stress? Or maybe there might be 4 or 5, but what?
Yeah. I come from a understanding principles background. I was fortunate for that when I first didn't get the answers to what I was looking for in school, to land on a guy who was nothing but fundamentals and principles. And it was rough. It was rough breaking me down.
Yeah.
And because I wanted to do all these methods and all these things. And he's like, and although he has a method that he's created, his name's Dr. Nicholas Romanov, but he really opened my eyes to the concept of even like a guy like Bruce Lee, and really like, hey, take what works, get rid of what doesn't, and start creating something new. And so you'd look at things like Wim Hof, or you look at things like holotropic breathing, or even Kundalini breathing, a lot of the, faster breath of fires, Kapalabhatis. These are super ventilation techniques. So these are faster, higher rate breathing techniques that are used in order to induce states, reduce carbon dioxide in the system, push more O2 into the red blood cells. You get a lot of other things that come with it. They can be dangerous at times. Which is why in yogic tradition, they come with stern warnings.
And why
you
is it
be doing any of this stuff?
Yeah. And you're saying it's dangerous because the hyperventilation can make you pass
so
out?
the hyperventilation can create vasoconstriction and a lot of things in people that, if they have heart problems or they have health issues, can really exacerbate that stuff. That doesn't mean that you never should use those things, but you should consult with somebody, namely your physician or somebody, so that we don't get in trouble here, that literally can say, hey, this might be something that would help you.
Right.
There are, there are chemical processes that occur that can, do things to people that aren't that great. And that goes for anything that we do to a large degree. But I think largely what I do is I take some of these principles and I really want to understand what's going to downregulate me, what's going to upregulate me, what's going to make me calm, what's going to make me up and clear and focused. That's what I'm looking to alter. And there's very different specific ways you can do that. And just to kind of do a broad overview of that.
Yeah.
A breath cycle has 4 pieces to it: an inhale, a breath hold, or a hold up top, if there is one, an exhale, and a breath pause, or a hold on the bottom, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of these things do specific things. They all have different reactions to them. The interesting thing, the work that we've found, and this is in conjunction with Stanford Medicine, is that no real one person has the same breath cycle or pattern as another. So you and I could get something that alters us very differently. And although there's a lot of chemical processes and physiological things that are happening that are very similar, emotions and reactions become very different. Thus, if I've got somebody with high anxiety, even as a world champion, they're going to respond very adversely to something that I may respond if I or you don't have high anxiety and I were to do that protocol. Thus, we start to, what we've seen is a generalization that has been driven towards people, and there is no real generalization. I taught a group, I took a group of like 30 or 40 people yesterday through something, and most people had very different reactions, but it was combined in a way to kind of give a broad feeling, right?
Yeah.
And everybody understood that, I wasn't tired after that. I didn't feel like I downshifted. I was upshifted. And I'm like, that's the difference. And this is why we actually screen people, or we give them specific things, or we find specific things based off those principles of how long of an inhale, how long of an exhale, how long of a breath hold, how long of a breath pause. All of these things start to vary. And so this is like the work that Huberman and I are actually doing right now, to where we're looking for our real work is to really find, and this goes back to unplug, man.
Yeah.
Is because we want to figure out ways to alter state through non-meditative practices, because in the moment, meditation does not really work. Meditation works as a tool in order to allow you to understand yourself, do a deeper to inward dive, which I am not saying not to do. I am saying you should maybe consider a lot of that. I have, and I do. But if in the moment I'm reacting to something, or I'm competing, or I'm driving in a car and somebody cuts me off, or I freak out because my kids are going bonkers, right?
Yeah.
I don't have time to go, oh, hold on, let me sit and, meditate this out. It's what can I use, whether it's visual, whether it's auditory, whether it's a breath that I can change in order to alter the state. And so this is what we're largely invested in right now. We've got an app that we're developing that should be pretty world class, that allows people to actually get their fingerprint from a broad spectrum of things, including breath work, visual, and auditory.
Wow. Awesome. Let me know when that comes out, and we'll intro it on the show for sure.
Yeah. If you're interested, or if your listeners are interested, go to theartofbreath.com. You can input your email, and you will be given notices and information as to where the app is at and when it's coming and what's happening. Okay.
Awesome. Now, in talking about that, I don't know why I just thought about this, but talking about breath, maybe because we're talking about kind of like euphoria, because we're talking about how feeling, we're in search of feeling. Have you found, or have you had some experiences with anything that helps a person? Like if someone's having difficulty with their breath, they're like, man, I just can't get this thing down. And obviously that's why you do what you do, you coach, but are there things that they can use from the outside to help them obtain better breath, obtain getting into a relaxed state? The first thing that comes from my mind is ayahuasca, and the reason that you heard of that. Okay. When I was in Sri Lanka 2 weeks ago, and there was this group of people that, swore that, their whole, meditation practice and the way that they actually calm themselves down was all grounded and founded in this ayahuasca experience. Have you found that in your, not necessarily, maybe it's ayahuasca, but have you found things help in this realm?
Yes, broadly.
Okay.
Now, I have participated in an ayahuasca ceremony. I have participated in a therapeutic sessions of psilocybin, MDMA. So these were under the guidance of a medical doctor.
Yeah.
And or you can call him a shaman. He's been trained, all of this stuff. I have found that some of these things can be beneficial to some people. They should be even higher warnings. Maybe not so much psilocybin. I think that in essence is not as dangerous as something like an ayahuasca.
Yeah.
But I'll be totally frank. Ayahuasca altered the way it just literally, I was on this path, like doing this, and it just went hard right. Time to do some change.
Yeah.
And some real change. And that was like 5 years ago. And it was a profound experience, but I've yet to do that again. I don't feel it necessary, because I know how to use breathing to induce these things as well. Holotropic breathing, invented by a guy by the name of Stan Grof, was directly developed for this purpose. Wim Hof's method is a very quick way to get there as well. And this is where Wim is such a pioneer. And such a game changer. It's not even the ice, man. The ice is great. Trust me. I've been doing ice even before I met or knew Wim.
And when you say ice, you're talking about an ice bath?
Yes,
Yeah.
which can
So,
profoundly impact mood, everything. It can
and when
change
you,
physiology. Yeah.
just for the listeners, because I know like we're talking through these things, but I want to get specific a little bit. When you say ice bath, you're filling a bathtub, your bathtub up with ice, filling it with cold water, letting it sit for a little bit, getting in for how long?
Essentially, yes. I've learned a more efficient way of doing this.
Okay.
And your listeners, if they decide to get into the ice bath bathing scene,
Yeah.
this will help them a ton and save them a lot of money and probably save a little bit of water.
Okay. Yeah.
A lot of bit of water. I converted due to my friend Casper Vandermolen, who's from the Netherlands. I converted a meat freezer into my ice tub. And so the meat freezers
It's brilliant.
are waterproof. And
Wow.
you can fill them with water. And you can leave the water in there for like a week and a half without it really anything negative happening from your body going in and out because it's so cold. So
Yep.
you first set you let it run for 36 hours and then you set it on a timer for like 2 hours a day and it keeps it in the 30s. And so I've got water that stays in the 30s, which is much colder than ice bath, like putting ice into a bath.
Wow, that's brilliant. Is there a certain brand that you use? Like,
yeah, I have a Kenmore, a buddy of mine gave to me. It's a huge one, so it'll fit in an offensive lineman.
wow.
It's 61 inches long, 32 inches wide, and 34 inches deep. And that my wife and I got it right before I came in here. I just got out. So, and my wife was just in the sauna and the cold plunge a minute ago. So this is part of our morning routine, and it's a great thing. But I really think breathing is actually the key point to all of this stuff. And it allows us to like, look, what happens when you get, I mean, how many of your listeners are going to experience this? Maybe they'll go try doing an ice bath after this, which is fine.
Yeah.
But be aware. And just there are high sympathetic reactions that happen, and watch your breath. And I have a rule now, and it's it's for adaptation to something. And it's, you get 10 breaths, and those breaths should be nasal only. And no matter how fast that happens, you're out at 10. And as you adapt, which takes a little time, you'll find that 10 breaths at the start may take less than 1 minute, because you're going to get into an ice bath and go,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Where somebody like Wim could get in and he could probably do 10 breaths in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm more around like 5 minutes when I'm fully adapted. When I haven't been on the road all the time and I've spent enough time in the ice for about 2 weeks, I can go about 5 minutes plus, 5 minutes, 30 seconds on 10 breaths. And that can be a pause, a hold up top and a pause on the bottom, 10 full cycles. And that changes, that alters. When I haven't been in there, that indicator, there's my indicator. I'm literally like 2 minutes. And it's like, oh, not adapted. My breath, like I was saying, that dedicated area in the brain, you cannot, you have to make some changes in order to get there. And this feeds back to technology. Like, look, use technology, learn from it. Don't get to a point to where it narrows you. Get to a point where it just starts to narrow. Then pull out, learn, allow plasticity to set in. How does it apply to my outside environment? How does it apply to the way I feel? How does it, allow me to do these things?
Yeah.
I think that's really the key to all of this. I just recently in September got back from a shark dive, a great white shark dive.
I heard that, man. I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah. And this is where, we were using technology to understand physiology, right? We were using some of our testing protocols that we're doing with Stanford. This is in conjunction with Stanford.
Okay.
And this is why I went down there. And they have a VR lab, and they wanted to shoot great white sharks with a VR lab and being out of the cage with them. And so we were granted 3 permits, and I got one of those permits to get out.
You were out of the cage.
Yeah. Well, first 2 days I was not. Wow. And I observed the divers who pioneered this, a guy by the name of Mornay and Michael Muller, and another guy by the name of Brock, who all have pioneered this way of diving with these animals. And here's the interesting thing is, you have an animal that is dedicated, that is absolutely hardwired for being an apex predator.
Yep.
It kills and it eats, and then it searches, right? It knows what's prey and what isn't. If you behave like prey, you will be treated like prey. If you stand your ground and come at the shark and control yourself, if it comes towards you, the shark veers off. Now, I am not suggesting by any means anybody go attempt this. Not in the slightest.
Right.
But that's a quick overview of what I learned in 2 days before I was granted access to get out of the cage at 40 feet down. And there were like 5 or 6 sharks in the water that are as big as, a small car. And you're looking at these things, and the one thing that was told to me is don't get mesmerized. And this is that whole focus. Do not get mesmerized by a shark, because there are other sharks in the water and they are looking, and all they know is one thing. And so if you don't behave that way, you have to be calm. And I had to keep a breathing pattern that
I was going to say, did you find that you were successful in that, or were you thinking,
100%.
Oh, man, my breathing? Yeah. Okay.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. For as much as I could for my first time getting out of a cage,
I'm going to say, man.
Yeah.
You're going to do it again?
Yeah, I'm going to do it again in September.
Wow. And where is it again?
Isla Guadalupe.
Okay.
So it's 150 miles off the coast of Ensenada, Mexico.
Okay.
And it's a 20-hour boat ride out, and then you literally shore up to this huge bay that's got about 250 white sharks that come there for a certain amount of time of the year. And you literally pull up and you see these dinosaurs just in the water. And there's nothing else on this island. It's just this deserted desert island, man. It's a trip.
Wow.
It's like Jurassic Park, but like it literally. And you see these things in the water, and you're like, that is not a small animal.
and then you get in, and you're like, that is 10 times what I thought, right? I mean, it looks big from the out, right?
The first time I got in the cage, I was like, and I'm like, okay, control your breathing. And you're in a cage, which then confines you, right? You're like, but I'm safe, or am I?
Right.
Like this thing's pretty big. It might be able to go through this if it wanted to. But you observe and you watch and you control and you control the things you can, and you allow the things to happen that you can't. And you just observant of this stuff, and then you're in there for like 30 minutes, and you get out and you absorb what you did, and this is the importance of having something to allow yourself to come down and shift, and allow that plasticity to kind of take its effect, right? And then you can get back and go, and it was a very interesting process. These guys are absolutely phenomenal at what they do, and you say they're fearless, but they're not. They're aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
And fear exists on every level. It's how you're dealing with that and how you're actually navigating that stuff.
Wow.
And it was just a profound experience it's not about us diving with sharks. It's about us understanding fear and anxiety and how we're going to deliver that to somebody who has a problem even getting out of their house or socializing, right?
Wow.
And because it's the same thing.
It is.
It is the same thing. But we don't know how all this
or maybe worse, right? Or maybe worse.
Yeah, man. Well, yeah, right.
Well,
look, I mean, I've been crippled by far worse.
Yeah.
Literally, I have been crippled by far worse situations. My first time public speaking, I was a nightmare.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm told by the guy who gave me the opportunity, he goes, it was so terrible, I had to walk out of the room. And he did. And I watched him do it. And I'm like, that's why he did that. Like, I was so bad at talking in front of a crowd. Like, it was just, and I was so like nervous and embarrassed and so anxious. And now it's not as much, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's so powerful. Like what we're discussing right now. I mean, honestly, if everybody out there just took this one piece of the show and applied it to their life, myself included, it would change the way that we did life, like everything. And so I just think it's really cool where this conversation has gone. And I really don't want to stop talking about it, but we have to stop talking about it. But we're going to have Brian on the show again, completely up to him. But I do want to have him back on because there's a lot that we could continue going on. But for sake of time, Brian, I wanted to ask you, are there books you're reading right now besides Unplugged? By the way, if anybody gets a chance out there, go get this book. It's going to change your life. Any books that have impacted you in priceless ways, if you're reading them now, in the past.
There's a slew, and I think I'll narrow this.
Okay.
And it'll help set people up for maybe a path. One, there's a book that's written by a guy by the name of E.O. Wilson called Consilience, and it's about the merging of humanities, and really starting to connect the dots. There's another one called Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez that is about why certain people will survive and why others won't. And it is very, very interesting because it'll shock you as to who survives and who doesn't. And it really sets a lot of paths. But I think the two books that have really impacted me the most are Sapiens and Homo Deus by Harari. And those altered the way that I am now thinking. I'm trying to communicate in a language that allows people to get to the crux of, hey, why am I actually doing this? Like, am I thinking short term about this or long term? Is it a quality thing or is it a quantity thing? And quantity is perfectly fine if it's chasing quality to a large degree, but we all want more. And so I think, and those books work really well with what we did with Unplugged. My career has mostly been about a qualitative approach to things and looking at the skill development of something. And whether you're a mathematician, a professional athlete, a businesswoman, a mom, a father, whatever, this is applicable at any place, anytime, anywhere. And it's a broad thing. And whatever it is that you're doing, I think that if curiosity is allowed to roam free like a child, then you are going to live a very healthy life, regardless of how long it is. Yeah. And I think life is not about length. I think life is literally it's a present moment thing. And are you a kid? Yeah. And I just want to be a kid, man. Yeah, man. I just don't want to lose that.
100%. We're going to quote that, Brian Mackenzie. I just want to be a kid, Brian Mackenzie. Like, honestly, it really does come down to how much playtime are you getting, right? Like, is your life full of play? Because we lose that along the way somehow because we become, adults. And it does, you don't have to, you can blend the seasons together, and always allow play to happen, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
Huge
nothing wrong with being an adult.
Nothing wrong.
I'm just an adult kid.
Exactly. I love it, man. So if people want to find out more about what you're doing, Brian, what you're into, where can they go to find out more?
Powerspeedendurance.com is our site that kind of houses most of what we're doing right now. State will actually probably launch a website here fairly soon for the app and what we're doing in that business. So on social media, Instagram is @IamUnscared, Brian Mackenzie on Twitter and Brian Mackenzie on Facebook. And those are I think the big houses of where I'm at.
Okay. If you could pick one action step for our listeners to take from this call, what would it be?
I would say try and apply, and we didn't talk much about this, but think of your day as trying to breathe more through that nose, not your mouth.
Yeah.
Like I'll get off this. I already feel it. Like I'm ramped up from talking.
Yep.
And that our mouth was designed for communication and digestion. Our nose is designed for, it's a part of your respiratory system, and it filters air, and it has things that are involved with your immune system. Yep. And it slows things down a little bit. So if you find yourself in a moment where you're just getting ramped or whatever's happening, just slow it down, go to the nose, go to the nose, go to the nose.
Yep. Do you have a technique that you would apply to breathe through the nose, or is it just like breathe through the nose?
There's several things. You could use your traditional like pranayamas,
Yep.
your switching of the nasal passages, right? And learning how to do that without even touching it. But I largely think any sort of breath practice, my feeling is that if you're doing a breath practice, it should 99% be based nasal breathing.
Yep. 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 One thing I do, and tell me if this is completely wrong, but one of the things I've done in the past, and it forces me to do a couple things. I take a spoonful of coconut oil, I put some peppermint on it, I stick it in my mouth, and I swish it around. So basically I'm oil pulling, but I can't talk while I do it. So I don't communicate while I have it in my mouth, and it forces me to breathe through my nose no matter what I do. So I was taking long, brisk walks. I would sometimes even paddleboard with it in my mouth. So I'd probably have it in my mouth for 30 minutes to an hour. Would you say is that a good practice? Is there any way I can up my game at all?
That's a phenomenal practice. There's no wrong. Just so we're clear.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing.
Yeah.
It's you're either winning or you're learning.
Yeah.
And you know, you can actually do both, but it's like, hey, what am I learning here? And you know, I think the oil pulling thing's great. My wife does that a lot. I don't do it enough, but that's an easy way to trigger it. But I mean, I suggest most athletes, I mean, like the Annie Thorisdottir situation, she was nasal breathing for like, you know, 3 to 6 months before we actually allowed her to go back to mouth breathing with her endurance training. That altered everything with her capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Well, man, I'm just so honored that you came on and you blasted all of us with value bombs like crazy. By the way, everybody out there, Brian dropped a lot of names and dropped a lot of books and information. It's all going to be in the show notes. Don't worry about it. If you took notes, awesome. I took a ton of notes. Brian, thank you so much for coming on in between your travel and great white diving and all the things that you're doing and really just bringing the heat today, man. I appreciate you.
Matt, I appreciate you having me on, my friend.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Yeah. To everybody out there, just remember this. You are superhuman already. You don't have to become superhuman. It's in you. It's genetically ingrained in you. When you were 2 cells in your mother's womb, you were superhuman, and then you grew up and now you're you, and you get to take all this knowledge and apply it today. We only have this moment. So use this moment, be a kid, and play today. We'll see you guys next time.